Washington, as the man President Obama sent to Egypt says Mubarak should stay in power. And made in the USA, the technology allowing Egypt to spy on its internet users. Hello there, it's 0100 GMT, 3 a.m. in Egypt, where protesters are still hunkering down, not just in Cairo, but in streets and squares across the country. Their call remains the same, to oust Hosni Mubarak, but the deadlock continues with the Egyptian president set on staying on until September. Let's bring up to speed with some of the latest developments. There are reports coming through that one of the main opposition parties, the Muslim Brotherhood, will begin talks to end the crisis with Vice President Omar Suleiman. Now, we haven't been able to independently confirm those reports. The opposition had previously rejected all dialogue until President Mubarak steps down. Meanwhile, his son, Gamal Mubarak, and the rest of the top brass of Egypt's ruling National Democratic Party have resigned. And the US has reiterated its call for a peaceful and orderly transition of power. But the White House has distanced itself from a special envoy's remarks that Mubarak was critical to that process. Well, our correspondent, who we're not naming for his own safety, joins us now live on the line from Cairo. First of all, just bring us an idea of what's happening in the square. What's the situation there tonight?
The situation remains relatively calm. Certainly, the square is not as full as it has been on other nights. The protesters seem to be centred around one real particular area, which I think is where the tents and some of the speeches have been given. There's a speech currently ongoing now. I'm afraid I can't actually hear clearly what's being said. But as I say, it seems pretty calm. There's less of a military presence. There was a little bit of gunfire earlier on. But yes, by and large, pretty calm at the moment.
Have you been sensing a slight rise in tensions between the protesters and the army, with these reports of some protesters not being allowed into the square?
There were. To be honest, it has been a calmer day in general. There were moments of tension earlier on in the day, around about midday, when the army tried to make a move to remove some of the barriers. And there were a group of protesters that basically came up and sat directly in front of the tank's gun turrets. There were also moments when there were rival slogans being chanted by rival opposition groups in the square, and the army seemed to be stepping in to keep them apart. But it hasn't been as tense, certainly, as other days.
And then looking at this development, these reports that the Muslim Brotherhood, the main opposition group, may be set to meet with the Vice President Omar Suleiman for talks tomorrow. Give us an idea of just how significant that would be.
Well, yes, indeed. If these reports are true, then that is highly significant. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood has always said that it won't talk with the regime until Mubarak actually leaves. So there's been having these reports now of this sudden change potentially to enter talks with Suleiman and talk about what's believed to be a sort of process of Mubarak leaving office, which is a very different line. There's also lines coming out about they wanting the right to protest in public places and guaranteed safety. And you've got to remember that the Muslim Brotherhood is by far the largest political organisation in this country. It has been blamed for the unrest by Mubarak in recent days. And it has a massive influence. It has a huge social welfare network. So, yes, it does suggest potentially that there's a slight jostling, if you like, for a voice there amongst the opposition. The resignations of the top brass there today seem to have galvanised a little bit more urgency in and amongst the opposition to find a voice. and to come forward. And if indeed these lines from the Brotherhood are true, then yes, that's highly significant.
OK, well, we'll watch that development closely. Thanks very much for updating us on the situation tonight in Cairo. Well, let's now take a look back at the day's events and this report from Nick Spicer.
Egyptian TV announces big changes in the ruling party. Gone are the executive committee and the president's son, Gamal Mubarak. But it's the father who's got to go for the demonstrators. Army troops tried to take down their barricades earlier in the day. The head of the Army's Central Command came to ask them to go home so the country could go back to normal. They chanted back, "We're not leaving, he is." But Hosni Mubarak wasn't. Not yet, anyway. He met with senior cabinet members to talk about the economy, reeling after 1 million tourists fled. Still, the government would slowly get back to business, the Prime Minister told the nation.
I mean, for every day that goes, stability returns and we are more hopeful. We no longer see the events happening like last Friday, and security forces are gradually returning. Today you don't hear about more clashes, which shows that generally things are getting better. The opposition itself is very divided, but this doesn't mean that we won't talk to all parties. In the end, the main thrust of their demands is the same.
But the demands of the international community seem to have changed. In a surprise comment on Saturday, the former U.S. ambassador Washington sent to Cairo to talk to the Egyptian president seemed to back off on none too subtle hints that Mubarak must go.
I therefore believe that President Mubarak's continued leadership is critical. It's his opportunity to write his own legacy. He's given 60 years of his life to the service of his country. This is an ideal moment for him to show the way forward.
U.S. officials quickly said he was speaking as a private citizen and his views were his own. But Western diplomats have been slowly changing their emphasis from the need for immediate transition to the need for an orderly one. With Hillary Clinton saying that could happen under Vice President Omar Suleiman, who reportedly doesn't want to ask Mubarak to leave office right now. And that won't satisfy the tired but proud protesters in Liberation Square. There may be some changes in Egypt's ruling party and even in the views of the international community, but they say they aren't going until their president does. Nick Spicer, Al Jazeera.
Well, anti-Mubarak protests have been taking place outside the Egyptian embassy in Washington, D.C. Demonstrators there chanted slogans against the Egyptian president, calling for an immediate end to his 3-decade rule. They also asked the U.S. government to stop supporting him. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson is a former State Department official, and he says the U.S. appears to be sitting on the fence for now.
I don't think they know quite what they're doing yet. I'm encouraged by the fact that they're maintaining a tactical posture, at least, of sort of letting the Egyptians handle the situation and hoping for the best. I'm very discouraged today, though. If you're sympathetic with the protesters, which I think I am, I'm very discouraged by what I'm hearing about the greater bulk of the population in Egypt. They are tending to think that maybe this ought to be over with because they're not being paid, their jobs are not being effectively run, their businesses are being affected and so forth. So if they lose the support of the bulk of the population in Egypt, that's going to stop this pretty quickly.
Well, yesterday, the Italian Prime Minister called him wise, and today Hosni Mubarak received some more words of support, this time coming from the President of Israel, Shimon Peres.
In spite of all the attacks against President Mubarak, I know him for many years throughout his presidency, and I credit him with one of the persons who saved many lives by preventing war in the Middle East. We saved the life of Egyptians, of Arabs, of Israelis, by not allowing to renew a war. No matter what is now the criticism against him, his contribution for peace, as far as I'm concerned, will never be forgotten.
And let's bring in Nathan Brown now. He's in Washington, D.C. and an expert on Egypt from George Washington University. Thanks very much for being with us. So we heard there some mixed messages from leaders around the world, but also today we've been seeing a mixed message from the U.S. with the special envoy Wisner's comments, whether or not it was made in a private capacity, seeming to support Mubarak for now.
Well, I think the United States is in a difficult position. What they definitely want to do is to see an orderly transition in Egypt. But it's not quite clear how that's going to happen. In a sense, the demonstrators, the opposition, have the same problem. Getting rid of Mubarak doesn't tell you what kind of procedures you're going to have for reconstructing a new political order.